Welcome to Vehicle Data in the Age of Advanced Driver Assistance Systems, What Lawyers Need to Know. I'm Philip Vondra, Chair of Beverly Hills Bar Association's Personal Injury Law Section, and I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Andrew McDevitt. Andrew McDevitt is a plaintiff's trial lawyer at Walkup, Melodia, Kelly, and Schoenberger, where he specializes in wrongful death and catastrophic injury cases involving defective products, motor vehicle and big rig collisions, medical malpractice, and dangerous property conditions. He brings a mechanical engineering background to his practice, which has proven particularly valuable in complex cases involving vehicle technology, including rollovers, roof crush, seatbelt, airbag failures, and child seat defects. And now let's get started.
Morning, everyone. The topic today is data in the age of advanced driver assistance systems. I think this is relevant for at least two reasons. For any case that y'all are handling where there is an automobile involved, I think this is good information to at least be aware of for accident reconstruction purposes at a minimum. It's also something that I think is good to just have on your radar generally, because oftentimes, if there's a collision and the at-fault driver doesn't have adequate insurance, or there's a collision with a pedestrian, this is something that you should at least be thinking about, because there may be a potential products case against the manufacturer. And also, it's just important to know for really any vehicle-to-vehicle case, because there may have been a system that intervened that contributed to the crash, or a system that didn't function that should have. So, what is ADAS? ADAS is Advanced Driver Assistance Systems. It actually covers a fairly broad range of technology. The technologies use sensors, which include cameras and computers, to basically just perceive the environment where the vehicle's operating, and either warn the driver or take direct action on behalf of the vehicle. And then there's also systems that are like autopilot in Tesla vehicles, which are not fully driving the vehicle, but they will take over certain tasks like the acceleration and braking, as well as keeping the vehicle in the lane, or even changing lanes, or preparing the vehicle to exit. You can put the ADAS features into at least two high-level categories. Passive ADAS features would be things that are assisting the driver through alerts. So that would include like forward collision warnings, or lane departure warnings, or blind spot warnings. These are features that are not actually taking over control of the vehicle. They're not braking, but they're giving the driver a prompt. So hopefully that the driver can take an action that perhaps they otherwise would not have, to avoid a collision. Then you also have what are called active ADAS systems. Those are systems that actually do some sort of control of the vehicle. So probably the most common or most well-known would be automatic emergency braking, where the vehicle will actually brake for the driver. There's also lane keeping assist systems, which like if you're veering out of a lane, or the driver's not, maybe looks over their shoulder and the vehicle starts to veer out of the lane, it'll give a little nudge to the steering wheel. There's also adaptive cruise control, which is different than normal cruise control, which would just, you pick a speed, it goes that speed. The adaptive cruise control uses the sensors to adjust the vehicle's speed based on how the traffic surrounding it is moving and at what speed it's moving. There's also emergency steering, and then traffic jam assist. Those are mostly just different flavors of the other technologies. Emergency steering, some manufacturers actually advertise systems for if a driver becomes incapacitated, that it'll steer or take some other action to kind of put the vehicle in hopefully the least dangerous state. Traffic jam assist is just kind of the low speed adaptive cruise control. Within the industry, there's a scale that was developed that's commonly referred to as SAE level of the driver assistance, and it goes from 1 to 5. The features we're going to be talking about today are all level 2 or less. There's almost no level 3 or 4 vehicles on the road today. The Waymo vehicles, those would be level 4. And in the next slide, I'm going to go over how the different designations are described and what they mean. So the key thing to just remember here is the active systems will intervene, and usually that you would expect for those to generate the most data, and most likely these would be the ones where you may have a product liability theory based on how the system functioned or didn't function. For example, there's a number of class actions relating to these systems for what's called phantom braking. So you imagine you're driving on the freeway at 60 miles an hour, you're about to go under an overpass, and there's some shadows. The system gets confused, and then it slams on the brakes for nothing. And that's just the system malfunctioning. That can lead obviously to a rear end crash. It's also jarring and inconvenient. And so there's some class actions that are out there against various manufacturers for that phantom braking type of scenario. So this is the SAE scale. I actually have a kind of fundamental disagreement with this and how it's used, but this is what is used within the industry. Starting from the left, SAE level 0 would be no automation. It's all your normal vehicle. SAE level 1 is where you have a single automated system. So this could be just the cruise control or braking, but not no steering. And then level 2 is most new vehicles probably have at least an option of a level 2. This is a system that can perform steering, braking, acceleration, and at least according to the definition, the human is still monitoring all tasks and responsible for all the driving tasks. And this is, at least for me, where I have a kind of fundamental disagreement with the notion of a level 2, because what the manufacturers, including Tesla, will like to say is, look, this is a level 2 system. So what, it malfunctioned, so what, it made an error. By definition, the driver is always in control. What that ignores and doesn't account for is that human beings have perception reaction time, and these systems have a tendency to lull people to sleep. If you imagine, one of these systems, it works for 5 months without issue. You turn it on and it follows traffic without issue. It seems to work fine. And then, next day it makes an error. Well, anybody that has used the system for that long is going to basically be lulled to sleep. They're going to become complacent. You're going to become comfortable. You're not going to be hyper vigilant and ready to react. It then makes an error, and you've got moments to react before the system before you're in a crash. And the manufacturer will say, well, despite the human factors aspect, and despite human being perception reaction time, by definition, you're always in control, so you're always responsible. Level 3 is not common at all. There's a Honda vehicle that has a level 3. I wouldn't expect that we're going to see a ton of level 3 because what the level 3 system is basically the same as level 2, except level 3 basically is a system that is supposed to be able to put the driver on notice when the driver needs to take over. and put them into kind of a least dangerous state. So it's supposed to have like a handover process, and there's particular parameters that must exist. I don't think most manufacturers are even going to try for level 3. And then you have level 4, which is essentially the vehicle handles all aspects of the driving task. However, it's restricted to a particular area. So if you think of the Waymo vehicles, they drive themselves. There's nobody in the seat. However, they're limited to a geographic space. And that's what's the difference between level 4 and level 5. Level 5 does not have that geographic limitation. It's the vehicle is responsible for everything. It can do it in all conditions. And there's nothing on the road at this point that would be in that level 5 category. The Waymos and supposedly the Tesla Cybercab, those are going to be in your level 4. So ADAS systems are pretty broad in category. It includes everything from parking assist, cross traffic alert, which would be if you're reversing and there's a vehicle coming from one side or the other, the system may give you a warning, or it may actually brake. You've got some systems will actually have traffic sign recognition, and it may be that it just tells you, hey, you're approaching a red light, and just the display says red light, versus some systems that will actually react to the traffic control device. We got lane departure warning, which I mentioned. Emergency braking, again, I mentioned that. And the emergency braking varies in scope. So the simplest would be emergency braking for 2 vehicles traveling in the same path. One vehicle's stopped, and the vehicle with the emergency braking will stop. And then you have systems that basically progress in complexity. So can the system handle a right turn maneuver where there's a pedestrian crossing? Can it handle nighttime situations versus daytime situations? So not all emergency braking systems are equal, and basically as time moves on, the systems generally get more capable and become at least able to address more complex situations. I'm just going to show you a video just to see what these systems actually look like on a vehicle that is driving. So I'm going to hit play here.
Blind spot warning uses cameras or proximity sensors to detect cars in the lanes next to you. The system may visually warn you that a car is in your blind spot, or provide an audible warning if your turn signal is on. Forward collision warning and automatic emergency braking both use sensors like cameras or radar to detect if your car starts to get too close to the vehicle ahead. With some quick math, a computer can determine the likelihood of a collision based on your vehicle's speed, the speed of the vehicle in front of you, and the distance between the 2 cars. If you start getting too close, forward collision warning will alert you. If the math says you're going to collide with the other vehicle, automatic emergency braking will automatically apply your vehicle's brakes. More advanced versions of these systems can even detect pedestrians. If someone is walking in the path of your car, pedestrian automatic emergency braking will evaluate the potential of a collision. If an impact is likely and the driver hasn't taken any action, the brakes will automatically be applied.
Oops. So that's a demonstration of just a basic functionality of the different systems. And again, it'll vary by vehicle and manufacturer. What I do when I'm looking at a case or a collision, one of the first things I'll do is look at the manufacturer's website or the manual for the vehicle to see what systems they at least offered, and does the manual say that the system will do automatic, what will it do automatic emergency braking for? They will usually distinguish between systems that have just vehicle to vehicle, and then also systems that can react to pedestrians. And a good resource if you want to see examples of how different systems function in different vehicles is at the European NCAP, which is NCAP, and then also the NHTSA website. And you can see, at least in the European NCAP for different types of vehicles, it will actually include videos showing how the vehicles perform in various tests. The NHTSA website will at least tell you by vehicle which systems are offered. And there are some, not for all, but you can find some videos of the tests that are performed and how the system performed on the test, like that pedestrian pop-out scenario that we just watched in the video. Not all the vehicles actually stop. There's actually test videos where you'll see that certain vehicle systems will actually just hit the pedestrian, or they'll slow down, but they won't avoid impact. So the performance really does vary widely across the industry. It varies widely based on the model year of the vehicle. But there's some commonality across all of these systems. So if you think about each of these systems depends on the vehicle itself and the computer in the vehicle having a spatial awareness around the vehicle. And there's a limited number of ways it can do that. So one of the ways that one of the sensors that's used is cameras. And that's typically used for lane detection, stop sign or sign recognition, and then object and pedestrian classification. Essentially, the way most of those systems work is if you think of a video, any video is basically just a series of images, and there's a number of frames per second. So if you break it down, what the way the systems are working with the cameras is they have a bunch of frames that are just basically processed in series. And so if you just think about one frame of video, what is the system doing? So you've got an image from a camera, and then it has to take that image and try to get information from the image. The way that works is most of the systems now use artificial intelligence or machine learning. And essentially, what the system will do is the engineers will take, let's say, and this is just simplified for example, they'll take 100 images from a forward-facing camera. And then on those 100 images, they will draw in the computer, they'll draw where the lane lines are. They'll draw where they'll put like a little box, a cube box around a vehicle. They'll label it vehicle. They'll put a cube box around a pedestrian. They'll label it pedestrian. And then they will put a big rectangle across the roadway, and they'll say, this is drivable space. And basically what happens is they feed all these labeled images into the machine learning computer. And through that process, hopefully it will learn, okay, now when I give it a new image, based on how you've trained me, can I accurately identify where those things are? So can I now identify where, with an image I've never seen, you give that image, and then it will accurately draw a cube around the vehicle, a cube around the pedestrian, and label the environment. So that's a kind of I'm simplifying it, but that's essentially how they're working. They are basically trying to predict, and it's using probabilities to say, okay, in the training data, here were characteristics of a vehicle. Let me see if I can match those characteristics to this new image. And the performance varies widely based on how much data is used to train. So here's an example. It's important to know the systems can only identify things that they are trained to identify. So they cannot interpolate. They cannot kind of figure out new information. So a common example would be if you used in all your training images, you had 100 training images, and every stop sign that you drew a box around was red. Well, now you're trying to use that system in a different country and say they have a blue stop sign. Well, it's not going to be able to say, interpolate and say, oh, even though it's blue and it has the word stop on it, that's still a stop sign, because it just can't do that. It's not in its the way it was trained. That's not part of its training set. And there's other common examples where, like, you've got a roadway with some unusual lane markings. If those lane markings don't have characteristics that were same as what was in the training set, it's not going to be able to figure it out. The way I like to think of it is the computer, basically, if you have an image that it's processing, I think of it as it's putting a transparency sheet, like we all had when we were in grammar school. It puts a transparency sheet over it, and then it's drawing the roadway. And then that's what or drawing the roadway and the vehicles and the pedestrians, et cetera. And then that's what the computer is using as its source of information. And that's what it uses to determine how to, where it should steer, whether it should brake or not. And the thing to know here is that all these systems, there's only there's a limited number of ways they're going to get data about the environment, and all the decisions and all these features basically run off that set of data. So the same sensors that are used for autonomous driving can be used for automatic emergency braking. They can be used for the the adaptive cruise control, and the number of sensors in the vehicles also varies by manufacturer, by model year. Another sensor that is common is radar, and that's basically what the radar is doing is you've got a radar sensor at the front of the vehicle. It's got a transmit sensor, so it's sending out these radar pulses, and then it's got a receive sensor, and usually multiple. And basically, it sends out this radar pulse, and that reflects off an object, and then the receiver basically is able to recognize what it reflects off. So it gets all sorts of reflections off of different things in the environment, and it can come up with a distance to those objects, and then the system itself overall will know how fast the vehicle that has the radar is traveling, and from that it can figure out, okay, how fast is this vehicle in front of me going? How far away is this object? And again, it's still using that to build this environment that it's trying to make the decisions based off. The different sensors that are used have different advantages and different functionalities that make some better for certain environments versus others. So, for example, you can imagine a camera. If you're in a rainy environment or snow or fog, if you can't see, then the camera can't see. However, the radar doesn't have that limitation. If you're in fog, it doesn't matter the radar. It's still going to be able to send the pulse and reflect off an object. So the radar gives capability that cameras don't, and they're often used together. And I'll explain that a little bit in the next slide. Then you also have LiDAR systems. These are less common. Most of the manufacturers use LiDAR to create high resolution maps of roadways. So by way of example, General Motors, for their systems that will drive on freeways and keep the vehicle in a lane on the freeway, what General Motors does is they hired companies to go around the country on major highways and get these LiDAR scans, which are very high resolution data clouds. So it's just all these data points that show the topography, where all the fixed objects are. And then the General Motors systems basically have that foundation of knowledge in the memory of the system. So they have kind of like a base map of the world. And they use that base map, and then they use the sensor data on top of it to navigate. There are some higher end vehicles that do use LiDAR. For instance, Volvo is one of the manufacturers that actually has a LiDAR sensor on its vehicles. You'll see most of the like self-driving, like Waymo, Zoox, those all do use LiDAR and a number of other sensors. However, the kind of drawback or reason why some manufacturers don't is LiDAR sensors have traditionally been a little bit more expensive. They're very data dense. You get a ton of data from LiDAR, so that means you've got to use more powerful computer processors. You have to have more memory. Just makes the whole system more expensive. And then it doesn't really function well in low visibility environments. So Tesla is kind of notorious famous for saying, you know, LiDAR is a fool's errand. They're not going to use it. In addition to those three sensors, you've also got ultrasonic sensors. Those are like if you may notice, like on bumpers of the newer vehicles, you see these little dots. There's usually about 5 or 6 on the front, 5 or 6 on the back. Those use sound to do similar to what a radar does. It's using sound pulses to detect, you know, how far different objects and things are in front of the vehicle. Those have the limitation on the ultrasonics is they're usually low range. So whereas a LiDAR radar has a range of hundreds of feet, these ultrasonics usually are, you know, 15 feet or less, and they don't work well above certain speeds. So like usually about 15 miles an hour or less, your ultrasonics will be able to function. But once you get above that speed, it doesn't work as well. And so they're usually, you know, for low speed kind of traffic environment, parking environments is mostly where the ultrasonic stuff is used. But it's also used for the automatic emergency braking in some systems in low speed environments, again, like driving through a parking lot. In addition to that, the sensor that all these systems will use is GPS, basically to get a position of the vehicle. The limitation of GPS is it usually has a resolution of about 15 feet, meaning the GPS point that it's telling you where the vehicle is located is accurate to about within 15 feet, which is not good enough for driving. So they use other sensors on top of that to get a more precise location. And those are based on like the vehicle's acceleration. Not really important to understand how it works. All the thing to know is that they have ways to make the account for the limitation in the radar's precision to make it more accurate. And usually those will be used in combination with maps that the vehicles have on them. So if you have a map and you know there's 4 lanes in this particular roadway, and then you know where the vehicle is, you know, okay, it's in lane 2 of 4. And so that can be used for the systems in combination with the other sensors. The last thing to just be aware of is what's called sensor fusion. So if you think about, let's say I've got a camera and I have a camera that's telling me there's a pedestrian, you know, in the roadway in front of the vehicle. And some of these camera systems will actually get a distance, but not all of them. So Tesla just uses cameras to figure out distance. But then let's say you've got also the vehicle has radar, and the radar system saying, well, I don't actually think there's a pedestrian there. And the way they do have a way with radar to detect pedestrians. They basically look at the arms swinging and the legs swinging. And what the sensor fusion is basically does is it'll say, okay, camera tells me there's a person here. Does the radar agree? If these both agree, then I will maybe take an action. I will brake based on that. But if the camera tells me something's there, but the radar doesn't, I'm not going to do anything. And that detail has actually led to a number of crashes. The first well-known fatal Tesla crash was a Tesla that went underneath a trailer that was going across the roadway. It went straight under, sheared the roof off of the vehicle, and Tesla's explanation for why it didn't break was that the radar and the camera did not agree. So the radar was seeing that there was an object in front of the vehicle, but the camera didn't recognize it as a trailer. So the system said, okay, nothing's there, and went right underneath the trailer. Another detail to know is that because there are these different sensors, the data from all of them can live in multiple places, and it's not going to be the same based on manufacturers. And this is where there's a split within the industry, and it's mainly a split between Tesla and then everybody else. Pretty much all the manufacturers that are not Tesla don't design their systems in-house. And what that means is Tesla has its own cameras and its own computer, and they do all the work to make the cameras and the computer work together. They do that themselves. What most manufacturers do is they say, okay, I'm going to build a vehicle. I want it to have a radar. I want it to have a camera, and I want it to be able to have different capabilities. So the engineers will come up with a specification. They say, okay, I want a radar that's capable of, seeing 600 feet or having a range of 600 feet. I want a radar that can detect up to 15 objects at a time. I want a radar that will give me the capability to do braking or warnings. And then they will go to different suppliers and say, hey, this is what I want. Tell me how much it would cost to buy it from you. Then for the camera, they'll do the same thing. I want the camera to be able to do X, Y, Z, and they'll go out to the different suppliers and say, this is what I want to include on the vehicle. Tell me if you've got a camera module for that. So what you end up having is parts that are made by different companies that are not designed from the get-go to be working together. So then somebody has to do the programming to make them work together. And the issue that creates is, okay, well, where does the data live? And is there data? So some of these sensors don't even have memory. So it's, at least at this point, unfortunately, there's no uniform way to get all the data from all these sensors across the different manufacturers. Really, the only one that is well understood at this point is Tesla. So in talking about the data here, I'm going to distinguish Tesla from everybody else and talk about the different approaches for each. I would say a majority of the manufacturers use a computer chip from a brand called Mobileye. And so going back to what I was just mentioning, if you have a manufacturer who's looking to include one of these systems in their vehicle, they'll get a radar from, say, Continental or Bosch or one of the other manufacturers, and then they'll get a camera. There's a number of companies that make cameras, and they will basically, that company here, an example would be a company called Vallejo. They'll get, and let me just show actually. So here's an example of a Vallejo camera module. So it's got an image sensor from one company, and that's basically the device that's taking those little snapshots. And then, as I was discussing earlier, there's got to be a computer that takes those snapshots and then tries to interpret the environment. Mobileye is the kind of go-to company for that. So what Mobileye will say is, we've got this thing, it's called a system on a chip. And basically, if you give this little chip the images, it will be able to do different things. And they've got the nomenclature they use is, they call it like IQ, EYEQ, and there's IQ1, IQ2, IQ3, IQ4. They basically every couple of years will be releasing a new one that, as the technology improves, will become more capable. So if you went back to, say, 2016, 2017, Mobileye's system, their little computer, it would have been able to do automatic emergency braking. It may have some capability to detect, the roadway edges. It may have some capability to detect lanes. And then you go, several years into the future, IQ 5 or 6, they'll say, okay, not only can this identify vehicles, pedestrians, it can also identify all sorts of different what are called VRUs, vulnerable road users. So our system can detect bicyclists and accurately classify them. It can accurately detect people on scooters. So the takeaway here is just it's going to what the capability of the system is going to depend on the version that the OEM is purchasing. And like everything, every product that's sold, there's going to be the entry level, medium level, and then the top of the line at least. So for a given version of the Mobileye chip, they may have a cheap one that can do certain things, a medium one that can do more, and then the top of the line that can do the most. So it's going to, for a particular vehicle, the capabilities and how accurate it is and the number of different scenarios it can handle are going to depend on, what chip they're using and what are its capabilities. The challenge this creates for attorneys is, okay, well, who has the data then? Where is the data? And what I've found is, at least in my cases, let's say you have a case against Toyota. Well, Mobileye they may have contracted with Vallejo. So Vallejo's only got certain information about how the whole system works, and then a bunch of that other information is from Mobileye. So if you're in the discovery process and you want the information, you may ask Toyota. They say, I don't have it. Okay, well then how do you get it? Well, Mobileye is a company in Israel. You're not going to be able to issue a subpoena to them. So that creates a challenge in the discovery process and getting the data. And unfortunately, there's no regulation currently that requires manufacturers to have particular types of data from these systems, but there really should be, but it just doesn't exist right now. Okay, so this is what I was just mentioning, that each of the manufacturers and depending on the components, the data may live in different places. Just a real quick note, in addition to the data likely living on the vehicle itself, on some sort of memory on the vehicle, almost all of these systems now have a modem. So almost all these vehicles have a modem, and they can send data back to the manufacturer. And you'll find if you look at the privacy agreements for these vehicles, when you sign up for one of their services, it'll say you're agreeing to share the data. So almost all these new vehicles now, you're traveling around, most people probably do not know you have agreed to send all sorts of data from your vehicle back to the manufacturer, and they use that for a variety of reasons. Some of it's for training and for improving, but they're also doing it for their own knowledge and also just for their own crash evaluation. So I wouldn't be surprised if you have a case and you sue General Motors. You say, hey, your system didn't work properly. Well, you better make sure that you get all the data that they have, because they may know immediately whether or not your theory is right or not, or whether the driver's account of what happened is correct, whether the driver is telling the truth about how fast they were going, whether they were steering or not, and what the system saw. So again, there's a distinction here between everybody else and Tesla. Tesla, because everything is in-house and they're in the United States, you can get all the data from Tesla, although it's usually going to be a pretty big battle. But as I mentioned, Tesla basically, instead of going to different manufacturers to get a radar and a camera, and then kind of building a Mr. Potato Head system, they have one central computer on their vehicles that takes all the data from all the sensors and processes it and makes all the decisions. And then for some of the vehicles that had radar and ultrasonics, they did get those from other manufacturers, but the Tesla computer processed all of it. But the Tesla vehicles have stopped using radar and ultrasonics and rely purely on cameras. And Tesla, we do know they store all the data from the vehicle. They have enough vehicle from the data from a crash that they can create the most precise reconstruction that you could imagine within 2 hours of the crash occurring, because all the data gets sent back to them. So if you have a case involving a Tesla, even if it's your client's vehicle or even another vehicle, you definitely should be trying to get the Tesla data. And there's some data you can get from Tesla fairly easily. And so I'm going to walk through that process and then tell you also what you're getting versus what is not included. So this is an older Model 3. This is one that at least had the radar and the ultrasonic sensors, as I mentioned. Tesla has since removed those from its vehicles. So now the Teslas just have the cameras, but all of them have, starting 2018 and beyond, all the Teslas have at least 8 cameras. They've got 3 forward-facing that are positioned right behind the rear view mirror. And then there's a what's called a repeater camera that's basically above the front fender wheel well. And then they always have a camera generally in this area of the B pillar. And then in addition, they'll have a camera in the back of the vehicle. For a very long time, Tesla did not have a camera right here in the front in the bumper area. So Tesla vehicles had a blind spot about 3 or 4 feet in front of the vehicle where the vehicle couldn't see anything, which is a huge safety gap because if, let's say there's a dog in front of the vehicle or a small child that runs out in front, there's a blind spot in the Tesla vehicles, at least until recently they've started adding a bumper camera. For Tesla vehicles made after 2021, all of them have a thumb drive in the glove box that is capable of and will record video. So again, if you have a client who's in a collision in a Tesla, you'll want to check that thumb drive. It'll have videos on it from the crash, and it'll have from all 8 cameras. They've now started, Tesla has, in the videos that you can get off of this little thumb drive, they will have overlaid on those videos information telling you speed, telling you whether the accelerator is being pressed, whether the brake is being pressed, telling you the steering wheel, whether it's being turned left or right. And then it will also tell you whether autopilot is engaged. The little steering wheel in the video playback will be a particular one color if autopilot's on, and a different color if it's off. So if you have someone who approaches you, says, I'm is in a crash in a Tesla and the car, is on autopilot and it steered itself off the roadway, certainly a starting point would be, okay, let me get that thumb drive. Let me check the video. Does what they're telling me match what the video is showing? But again, also, if you have got a client who was in a crash with a Tesla vehicle, so the defendant in the case was driving a Tesla, you definitely want to be asking for that video because it'll most likely show the collision itself and either prove or disprove the narrative that your client provided to you. In addition to the thumb drive, Tesla owners can request data from Tesla using their Tesla account. This slide shows you the website to go to, and then the right side shows you basically the drop-down menu and the options that are available. I would err on the side of requesting data from a time period, a week before or a week after the collision, just to make sure that you actually get the data you're looking for. When you do this, the message will say, it can take up to 30 days to get the data. In my experience, it's usually sent within 24 hours. What you'll receive is a zip file that's got a bunch of different folders, but there's four folders that will be of interest to you. First one is the camera recordings. Second is what's called the event data recorder. So that's we can think of like the airbag data. So let me pause for a second. On Tesla vehicles, you've got the main computer that controls all the autopilot and all the ADAS features. And then you also have a module that controls the airbag. And those have their own sets of data. This event data recorder is the data from the airbag module. There's a regulation, a federal regulation that says what types of data have to be included on the airbag module. So that's going to be consistent across manufacturers. The third folder that will be of interest to you is the vehicle, what's called the vehicle data folder. And then the fourth is the vehicle data report. And I'm going to go through what each of those folders contains. So your camera recordings folder will have files that look like what I'm showing you here. Those are just videos that are specific to each of the different cameras. In my experience, and I can't, I can't say kind of what the rhyme or reason is, but I have instances where I have the Tesla account holder request this data and get the camera recordings, but then a lot of times they just aren't there. And sometimes that means that the data never made its way back to Tesla, but that's not always the case. And unfortunately, until you get into litigation, there's not too much you can do. I've had people follow up when there's no camera recordings and say, hey, look, I didn't get the camera recordings. Can you check again? I've never had a scenario where that follow-up actually resulted in videos that weren't initially produced. So this event data recorder folder, again, this has the data from the airbag module. The thing to know about this is typically Tesla will give that folder will contain a file that ends in .edr. There's one additional step you usually have to do to actually get like a PDF that's readable. You have to go to this website, upload that EDR file, and then it'll give you a PDF to download. More recently, I've actually seen in cases where we've requested this data, the folder has both the EDR file and the PDF. I'm just pointing this out just in case you do have a account holder request the data and you get this .edr file. Just know all you need to do is go to this website, you upload it, and then you'll get the PDF that has the traditional airbag data, which will include steering information. It'll include information for usually up to 2, what the system calls events. So those are things that would trigger the data to be saved. It'll have accelerator pedal information, braking information. It'll tell you the different levels of acceleration that the vehicle experienced in the crash. It's always helpful information for any reconstructionist. And again, in any case where you've got a Tesla vehicle involved, whether it's a client or the defendant, this is a no-brainer to do. You always want to do this. The vehicle data folder includes data from the Tesla system. Sometimes they refer to it as car log data. It is a limited collection of data from what's called the vehicle's CAN, which is the controlled area network. So you can think of the CAN as like the hub. It's like the mission command. So all the different electronics in the vehicle will basically be sending data to this CAN, and then there'll be some electronics that will be looking at the data from other components. And there's an incredible amount of data that's saved. Tesla tracks data down to if you use the lumbar adjustment on the seat, that will be saved. Every single electronic signal you can think of is saved. But when you request it through the account, you'll get, let's say, 200 different data categories. And I, after fighting with Tesla for years across a bunch of different cases, I finally got them to produce all the data, and I learned that there are 10,000 plus data categories that they save. tracking virtually everything you could ever think of, including what the autopilot system, how it was, the information it was generating, for instance, how far, how many vehicles did it detect? How far did it detect the vehicles? How fast did it believe the vehicles around it were going? What sort of control decisions did the system make? Where did it think the lane lines were? It has more information than you could ever imagine. It'll have information like a data column that'll say AEB not fire reason. So it'll tell you, well, why didn't the automatic emergency braking function, or why did it? There's a tremendous amount of data. And I'm just going to play just to show you kind of just what that data looks like. And actually, this also shows you just my first steps when I open one of these files to make it a little bit more readable. So I just do a few things within Excel to make it easier to kind of just wade through it. Here I'm just, making the columns large, wide enough so that you can actually view everything. And then what I'll usually do is I'll just freeze the top part. So when you scroll down, it keeps the time. So when you're looking at the signals, and it keeps the column heading, so you can always see those when you're looking at the different entries. When you're looking at this file, you will want to search what's called Walkup. That'll tell you the crash algorithm Walkup. If you find that signal, that basically tells you, okay, that's when the impact occurred. So I start there, I find out the time when the impact occurred, and then I look at the data before that to see, okay, what was going on before that? How fast was the vehicle going? What were the steering movements? Was what was the brake being applied? Was it not being applied? Was auto steer on? Was it off? Was the system detecting hands on the wheel or not? But I usually start with the crash signal, and then I work my way backward to look at all the data to try to get an understanding of what happened. Just again, here I'm just showing you another technique I use because there's a lot of data on the field or in the document. I'll just filter it to get rid of all the blank columns so I can see here. So it says cruise control state. And then you can look and see, okay, how did it change? It was in standby, then it went to unavailable, and then it was enabled. And the thing to know is it will see where it says enabled here. That means it remained enabled until there was a change. So all the time periods in between the two, it was in the same state. And I'll do the same thing for the auto steer, which tells you, in addition to having the speed control activated, was the steering part also on in the time period leading up to the crash. And then again, you can do the same thing for vehicle speed to just get a sense of how the vehicle speed was changing in the moments leading up to the collision. Note that that's usually in kilometers per hour, so you got to convert it to miles per hour. The fourth folder I mentioned, the vehicle data report, I would actually probably start with this before looking at the data itself. Tesla has, they decided to, in addition to just giving that data file, they actually give you a file that does a limited interpretation of the data. It's actually pretty helpful. So you can see it contains a collection of these graphs that you see here. So on the bottom from left to right, it'll give you the time. And then on the vertical axis, it'll give you different information. This particular one obviously is showing you speed. And then this dashed vertical line, that is the moment, that signal that I highlighted in the Excel table. This is the moment of that crash algorithm wake up. So basically you look at this and you go, okay, this is about when the collision happened. What was the speed? What did the speed look like leading up to that? It's also got a bunch of other plots for different other signals. So this upper left one, if we look, we go, okay, here's this dotted line. That's when the collision happened. What did the accelerator pedal signal look like? Okay, it says the accelerator pedal was almost 100%. So this particular graphic here in the upper left, if you had someone who said, hey, the car just spontaneously accelerated on its own, which is a fairly common report that I've received in Tesla cases, you can check that, say, okay, well, at least the data in the vehicle is saying that was not without reason. It says that the accelerator pedal was being pressed. Then you can look down here, like the brake pedal application. Again, here's my collision at the vertical line. What was the brake pedal activity? And this is data I actually had from reviewing a potential case, and it didn't make sense because it says simultaneously the accelerator pedal is being pressed at the same time as the brake. Most people aren't driving with 2 feet, so that did not make sense. I never figured out why, but that was an anomaly, just a bizarre piece of the data. And then you can look at the brake cylinder master or brake master cylinder pressure. Really, the only significance of this one to me means, okay, the brake pedal, this says the brake pedal was being pressed because we can see here. Well, then why wasn't the brake pressure going up? Again, that part didn't make sense. To look at whether auto steer was enabled. You look at this upper right one, it shows you again the moment of the crash. And this says there was a fault starting a moment before the crash, but it didn't tell me why. It did not say whether auto steer, it didn't have this data. Again, I don't know why, but there was a gap in that data. But it did have in this lower box here, this is the hands-on detection. So basically there's a signal that it's not really detecting hands on the wheel. It's detecting whether there's a little amount of torque on the wheel. And this says, okay, the hands were detected. So that's significant because you want to know, okay, is Tesla going to say they weren't paying attention because their hands were not on the wheel? And then this last one, the cruise control state, was helpful because it tells me in the 5 seconds before the crash, first cruise control was on standby, then it was enabled, then there was a driver pedal override, which means the driver was pressing the accelerator, then it went back to standby, then it went to unavailable standby. But at least at the moment of impact, there was no cruise control enabled. So that's part of the data you can get from Tesla, but that's not even close to everything that exists. This is a video showing a video from a Tesla with the data that the computer has overlaid. So I'll hit play here, but you'll see all these little blue squares. Those are telling you, okay, that's where the radar reflected off of something. This green line, that tells you where the autopilot system believed a lane line edge to be. The red line, it believed there was an edge there. This orange line, it believed that was a boundary. And then it's got these different signals. So auto high beam, blinded, raining. Those are just like probability meters. So basically it's saying it's constantly evaluating, is it raining? Well, based on what the camera's showing, the probability of it raining is 1, 0.001. So no, it's not raining. And then the engineers will have some threshold built in. So they'll say, okay, if the rain signal is above 0.7, I'm just making this up, then it's raining. So it's not like there's not a certainty to it. These are all probability. The way these things work, it's just probabilities. So here we've got restricted road and it says 0.79. So it's confident, okay, this is a restricted road. It's not a controlled access road. This is just a restricted road. And then you'll see, again, when I hit play, the numbers that are displayed on the image, those are all what the system is believing to be distances. So you see here it says, okay, that's a car. It's 81 feet away. It has drawn a red around the stop sign, so it's detected that's a stop sign. This is just a particular set of colors that they use to say, okay, this is a vehicle directly in front. And then you can see on the right, this is how it is believing it's telling you, the system, okay, this is what I think the road looks like moving forward. And then it'll switch. Now we'll switch to a more dense city view. Again, same thing. It's got a box around the traffic light. It says, okay, I think that's a traffic light. It says autopilot's on. And then it's, again, this is kind of the transparency overlay. This is what the system is saying, this is what I believe exists here. You can get all this data from Tesla, and you can imagine what's more valuable for a reconstructionist or for evaluating whether there's a defect. The video that doesn't have this overlaid or the video that does. Obviously, this is more valuable. And in the Tesla case in Florida, where the verdict, they got the verdict of 300+ million. This was actually some of the most important information that they used in the case, because they were able to show that as this Tesla came to a T intersection and it crashed into a parked truck, the system actually saw that there was a stop sign. It actually saw that the roadway was ending. It just did not act on it. And so that was part of the theory of the case was, look, the computer knew that the road was ending. The computer knew that there was a pedestrian there. The computer knew there was a vehicle there. It just didn't react. Again, this is just more showing you again, this is just to show you what are these computers doing with all the camera information. And they are basically trying to overlay where they think things are, and it's all probability based. It is not an exact science, because that's just not how the systems work. Tesla also they have another system that's called AP-Viz, but basically it's a system that they can use in-house, where all the data they obtain, those 10,000 different signals, they can look at every single signal as a function of time. They can synchronize it with the video. So just give you an example. So this image here, we can see there's this red Honda CR-V in front of the Tesla. This box in the upper right tells you, okay, the computer believed that the position of this vehicle was, you could see 20, I'm not sure what the units are, so 20 feet or 20 meters in front. It's saying, okay, that's how far it is right now. And then it'll tell you this is CIPV velocity. So that's the term Tesla uses for the vehicle immediately in front. It's called close in proximity vehicle. The system's saying, okay, this is the speed of that vehicle over time. This is how much that vehicle is slowing down or speeding up over time. And this is 3 of the 10,000 different signals that they generate. But if you have a case with Tesla, you're for sure going to want to chase down this information. If you are ever in that position, I've got a bunch of different orders on motions to compel and a bunch of different, briefs that basically outline this information. And I've got Tesla's filings from Tesla where they acknowledge all this stuff exists. If you don't have that, they're not going to tell you about it. So in non-Tesla vehicles, it's much more complicated, and you're plowing new ground in every case. And a starting point is, so this is from a VW vehicle. This is just a page that I found from a document that was online. And what this tells me is, okay, these are the different modules that exist. So remember, I talked about how, different manufacturers will go out to the industry. They say, I want the radar from you. I want the camera from you. And those are all going to be connected to this one, CAN bus. But in order to find where that data lives, you got to figure out what's the module called. So then, at least in a particular case, what I did is we had, our retained expert go with folks from the OEM, and you can plug a cable into the vehicle, and you could say, I want it to look at this module, get all the data from this module. Well, you have to know the module exists. It helps to know the code for the module. So you can say, we want to pull the data from the module that's identified as, J428. That's the control module for the cruise control. Let's see if there's any data on that. They won't tell you that. And so again, it's really the lack of standardization, the lack of regulation. It makes it really difficult. And there's not a a blueprint for doing this. You basically, for each particular manufacturer, you have to figure it out in the case and issue discovery to do that. So again, just what kind of data can exist here? Like I said, you have the telematics data, which is all the data sent back to the manufacturer with the modem, and it's going to vary by manufacturer. The place I would recommend looking is the agreement for the service. So usually when you sign up for one of the connected services, it'll say we may collect XYZ data. So that's where I would look, say, look, you told the customer when they signed up for this that you were going to be collecting this data. Where is it? There's also information that may be stored on the infotainment system, what most of us think of as the GPS system. That may have its own memory module. And in fact, in Teslas, it does. They have like a little micro SD chip that's connected to it that has a whole collection of data. There may be these ADAS event logs, which, at least in my experience, outside of Tesla, you're going to have to do the process I just described, where you're basically connecting to the vehicle and saying, get me all the data from that specific module. What exists there? The CAN bus and the ECU data, again, same thing. It's going to be dependent on the manufacturer, whether it's even stored, and whether you can get it. But then also some of these manufacturers will have, you'll have what are called diagnostic trouble codes. So you plug into that same port. All these vehicles have what's called a DTC port. And usually that's what people use to get the airbag data, but all it's doing when you're plugging in with the tools that exist is when you get the airbag data, you're plugging in and it's just going to the airbag module. Well, you now, with all these advanced systems, you want to be trying to pull the data from all the other things that are connected as well. The different manufacturers have, their own trade name for their connected services. So GM has had for a long time OnStar, which used to just be a emergency 911 system that collects GPS, it collects speed, it collects hard braking information, it collects crash notifications, and in a case with GM, that's what you're going to want to ask them about, all the OnStar data. Ford has their systems called Sync or Ford Pass Connect. Again, it's got similar types of data, and again, it's all the data that being transmitted back to a manufacturer necessarily has to use a modem unless it's downloaded directly from the vehicle. Instances where they may not have it is if there's a severe crash and the modem's damaged, or there's a severe crash and the battery that takes out battery power from the vehicle. If the vehicle doesn't have battery power and a modem and a cell signal, it's not going to be able to send data back. So that may be scenarios where you might not get data. At least in Tesla vehicles, if let's say you got in a crash in an area where there was no cell service, but the components were not damaged, the Tesla is actually programmed, keep trying. So now you're in an area with no cell signal, you get it towed to a yard where there is cell signal. Well, as soon as it gets cell signal, it's going to keep doing that until it's successful. So that's just something to be aware of, that the data may not get transmitted or may get transmitted late if the vehicle's in a place that doesn't have cell signal. Toyota has its own connected services. They say they collect data on a continuous and regular basis, and then some of these manufacturers share the data with advertisers, etc. Stellantis and Hyundai and BMW, they each have their own. Again, I would just recommend looking at the user agreements, and then also just knowing the data may not, it might not just be on the vehicle, it may be in the manufacturer's possession. I think it's a little unknown at this point. It wouldn't surprise me if manufacturers decided, okay, all the data we collect, it's going to be transmitted back, and then we're not going to store a backup copy on the vehicle. So you may go to a vehicle, try to download it, and go, oh, there's no data there. But the manufacturer may have it because it may have been sent back to them. And at least An example of this is Tesla in their latest computer. They actually, and I can think of no other reason other than they don't want people to, the litigants to get it. They've actually now programmed their vehicles. Once they send the data, it actually does like a wipe of the data on the computer, and they do it in a way that it makes it like forensically impossible to recover. Like someone who's clearing the computer when the FBI kicks down the door. So again, for Teslas, at least up to, I can tell you for sure, up to what's called hardware 3 in their vehicles, you can get the data off the vehicles. But my understanding is that for the hardware 4 vehicles and probably the newer ones, they're taking steps to make that impossible because they don't want you to do it. The NTSB, just on this topic, an aside, the NTSB has been recommending for almost a decade now that there be some standardization in what data is preserved and made available. That type of regulation does exist for the airbags, but not yet for all this data. So other than Tesla at this point, there's not a uniform understanding as to what data every vehicle collects, every manufacturer, and it very well could differ based on model and model year. Things I would recommend in your discovery, as with all sorts of evidence, send out a spoliation letter right away. Send it to the manufacturer if you can get the in-house counsel email. Send it to the if the service is a separate, which they usually will have it separate. OnStar may be a separate legal entity than the OEM. Send the preservation to them, and this is the general language that you want to use to ask them to preserve everything that's listed there. And then some discovery requests. I would recommend you want to send RFPs to the manufacturer for all data collected from the vehicle, and certainly don't limit it to the airbag data. I would do a 30B6 deposition on this telematics issue. If you're trying to get this data, you want force them to produce a witness who's going to say what data the vehicle collects, what is stored, where it is, how to get it, and then request their own documentation about what data is stored beyond just the airbag data. And most likely you're going to have to fight with them. They're not going to, in my experience, they are reluctant to just agree on this and to produce it voluntarily. Some last just points, the tools that exist right now, the Bosch CDR tool is probably the most common. Reconstructionists know about this. It's the standard tool that most experts will use to get the airbag data off the vehicle. And then there's another one called Burla IBE, which has more capability. This is more commonly used by law enforcement. If you recall the Murdoch murder case, that South Carolina family murder case, one of the things they were able to do was get vehicle data off of the I think it was either a GM vehicle he was driving to show when was the vehicle started, how fast was it traveling, certain information that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to get just from the EDR because there was no crash. And then there's also obviously the proprietary tools that the manufacturers have that, at least in one case I've had where we did an inspection at the dealership so they could use the dealership tools to download all the information off the vehicle. You may need to do that. In terms of kind of consultants, if you're going to be going down this path, you want to get vehicle data forensic expert early so that they can help you navigate through what data can you get on your own without the manufacturer, and then when you're in the discovery process and doing setting up inspection protocols, you certainly want to have your own expert who's weighing in on any proposed protocol to get the data to make sure that at a minimum they're getting all the data that is going to be helpful to or of interest to your side, not just what they want. And then making sure that you're including language that all the data that's captured is produced in a readable format, so it's converted if necessary. And then an essential thing is that any piece of data that they get off the vehicle is given to you. You may get a protocol saying, hey, we're going to download XYZ data. And then they go to the inspection, they download a whole bunch more, but the protocol only says they're sharing, this XYZ data. Absolutely every time you want it to say, we get every single thing you get, and we get it on the same day that you get it. None of this, it'll download, you guys will take it back to the headquarters and then give it to me in 2 weeks. Those are just some things to make sure you include in the protocols. Then lastly, there's some of this is really, kind of new terrain. There's certain data that some, experts are comfortable with and beyond the EDR data, and then they can interpret. But I've found that most often you're going to have to go through the sequence with the defense, come up with the protocol, get the data off the vehicle, make sure you have all the data, and then set a PMQ to have that PMQ walk through the data and ask the PMQ questions about what the significance of the different types of data that's on the vehicle. Since we're kind of over on time here, so just kind of quickly go through 6 takeaways here. I think we've covered each of these. But at least if you've got a Tesla case and you have questions about getting the data, I've spent years fighting with them on this. And if you need exemplar orders and motions, and then also transcripts where they've acknowledged certain data exist, feel free to reach out.
Alrighty, Andrew, it does look like we have 2 questions. Would you have time to assist with those 2 questions?
Sure.
All right, so first person is asking just a quick question. How long does Tesla keep the vehicle data?
It should be indefinitely. So if it the testimony that was obtained in one of the case where that huge verdict was rendered was they keep it, and if it's gone, it means someone deliberately deleted it.
Great, thank you. And then I have one more question. Can any commercially available AI tools such as Claude tell you if the data is incomplete?
I think I think it can help, and I've found those actually to be helpful, at least in giving a preliminary read of the data. It may be able to kind of point it out. I don't know. My hesitance in relying on that would be most of the OEMs, they're not going to tell you, they're not going to publicly identify all the data that exists. So it's kind of hard for me to understand how Claude or one of the other programs would know what's missing. But they can certainly look at the data, and if there's obvious gaps just based on like time or signals, they see one signal referencing another signal that's not in the data set. I think it could be useful for that reason.
Great. Looks like that's it for questions. This concludes today's presentation. Thank you so much, Andrew, for an excellent presentation today, and thank you so much to our audience. Have a great day, everybody.